Welcome back to the Avoidant Effect, where we uncover the hidden psychology behind avoidant attachment and the behaviors that reveal what words often cannot. They walked away thinking distance would finally give them peace. They convinced themselves they didn't need you and that leaving was the safest choice. But what happens when the silence becomes heavier than the relationship ever felt? And what happens when the person they pushed away becomes the one they suddenly can't stop thinking about? You were pushed away as if you suddenly stopped mattering. Someone who once held your hand can eventually walk past you with a distance that makes you question whether the connection was ever real. But what happens behind that distance is far more complicated than it appears. An avoidant can create space to feel safe, but space doesn't automatically erase attachment. Silence doesn't instantly destroy emotional bonds. In many cases, the very defense they use to escape intimacy can eventually leave them confronting the feelings they were trying to avoid. Avoidant attachment often creates a painful contradiction. They can deeply want connection while becoming frightened when that connection gets too close. When they pulled away from you, it may not have been because you meant nothing. Closeness can activate fears of dependence, vulnerability, losing freedom, or being emotionally trapped. So they retreat, shut down, and convince themselves that independence is safer than needing someone. At first, that distance can feel like relief. They may believe they've finally escaped the emotional pressure. They fill their schedule with work, hobbies, friends, or anything that keeps their attention occupied. But eventually, the quiet can become harder to ignore. The freedom they expected may not feel as satisfying as they imagined. Instead, the absence of the relationship starts becoming noticeable. This is where their mind may begin rewriting the story. To make leaving feel justified, they focus on your flaws, remember every disagreement, and build an internal argument for why the relationship could never work. Those thoughts can temporarily protect them from uncomfortable emotions. But attachment doesn't disappear simply because someone creates a list of reasons to leave. Once the immediate threat of closeness is gone, they may finally have enough emotional space to notice what the relationship actually meant to them. Memories return. Small moments become meaningful again. Your laugh, your presence, the way you understood them, or the comfort they felt around you can suddenly stand out in ways they couldn't process while you were still close. And something else can happen. Their memory may begin highlighting the best parts while minimizing the difficult ones. They remember the patience you showed, the times you gave them space, and the moments when you understood them without demanding too much. Gradually, an idealized version of the relationship can form in their mind. Then comparisons begin. New people may enter their life, but emotional history isn't something that can simply be duplicated. Someone else might be attractive, interesting, or compatible, yet still fail to recreate the particular sense of familiarity and emotional connection they associated with you. That can create an uncomfortable realization. The independence they protected so fiercely may have come with a cost. They may start wondering whether they walked away from something valuable because they were afraid of what intimacy required from them. Your absence can become especially noticeable during quiet moments, at night, during familiar routines, or when something happens that they would normally have shared with you. The missing connection becomes harder to overlook. They may wonder what you're doing, whether you've moved on, or whether someone else has taken the place they once occupied. This is also where jealousy can surface. Someone who repeatedly insisted they didn't need anyone may suddenly feel unsettled by the thought of you building a life without them. That doesn't automatically mean they are ready for a healthy relationship, but it can reveal that the emotional bond mattered more than they previously admitted. Avoidants often rely on deactivating strategies to reduce feelings of attachment. They may tell themselves that relationships are restrictive, emotions are dangerous, and independence is more important than closeness. Those beliefs can feel convincing when the person they are attached to is still reaching toward them. But when you stop chasing, there is nothing left for those defenses to fight against. Your messages aren't there to dismiss. Your emotions aren't there to avoid. Your presence isn't there to trigger the same immediate fear of closeness. At first, that can feel peaceful. Eventually, however, the walls that once provided protection may begin to feel isolating. The distance they created to escape emotional pressure can become the very thing that forces them to confront what they lost. And that is where the real conflict begins. They wanted freedom from the intensity of connection, but now they have to face the emotional reality of life without it. Their emotional defenses have finally gone quiet, and without all that mental noise, they begin recognizing what they had been avoiding all along. They miss you. They feel the loss. They start wondering whether walking away was the biggest mistake they made. For someone who built their entire identity around independence, that realization can feel almost threatening. If they are no longer the person who needs nobody, then who are they? The independence they once protected can suddenly stop feeling like freedom. Instead, it can feel empty. Questions they avoided for years begin surfacing one after another, slowly weakening the emotional walls they depended on. And underneath those defenses is something they rarely allow themselves to experience fully: genuine longing. This isn't simply missing someone's company for a few days. It's the deeper desire for the specific emotional connection they once shared with you. That can frighten them because it challenges the story they've always told themselves. They believed they were perfectly comfortable alone. Now they're replaying memories, wondering where you are, imagining you with someone else, and experiencing emotions they never expected to feel. Eventually, they may have to confront an uncomfortable truth. Being alone was never as satisfying as they convinced themselves it would be. Connection wasn't simply an optional luxury. They had emotional needs too, even if they spent years denying them. That internal conflict can affect them physically as well. Their sleep may become restless because their mind keeps returning to the past. Their motivation can drop. Their appetite may change. They may suddenly become emotional when they least expect it. The feelings they kept controlled for so long can finally break through, forcing them to acknowledge that the relationship mattered. And when an avoidant eventually reaches out, it often isn't as spontaneous as it appears. They may spend days or weeks thinking about what to say, imagining different responses, and trying to find a way back without exposing too much vulnerability. The first message may look completely casual: a song, a funny video, a memory, a simple question that seems innocent. But beneath that casual approach is often uncertainty. They want to know whether the door is still open without having to immediately admit how much they care. They may be terrified that you've already moved on. The possibility that someone else now receives the attention, affection, and emotional connection they once had with you can make the loss feel much more real. That's when memories can become idealized. They remember your patience. They remember how you understood them. They remember the moments when you stayed even when they struggled to let you close. The difficult parts may fade into the background, while the value of what they lost becomes increasingly clear. But returning doesn't automatically mean they have healed. It can simply mean their old coping strategies stopped working. Distance didn't give them the peace they expected. Avoidance didn't remove their attachment. Isolation didn't make the feelings disappear. Instead, they discovered that running from connection never eliminated the need for it. Even sending that first message can create intense anxiety. They may type something, delete it, rewrite it, and debate whether to send it at all. They want to sound interested without appearing vulnerable. They want reassurance without having to directly ask for it. And once the message is finally sent, the waiting begins. Every minute without a response can feel enormous. A warm reply may bring immediate relief, while a distant response can trigger disappointment, fear, or another retreat. This is why reconnecting isn't the same as repairing a relationship. An avoidant may want to restore the comfort of connection before they're ready to discuss why they disappeared, how their behavior affected you, and what needs to change. Real repair requires accountability. It requires acknowledging the hurt, explaining the withdrawal honestly, and being willing to behave differently going forward. That is also where vulnerability becomes unavoidable. They may have to admit they were wrong. They may have to acknowledge that they cared more than they admitted. They may even have to confront the possibility that their carefully protected independence kept them from experiencing the relationship they actually wanted. Sometimes this creates a dramatic reversal. The person who once demanded space may suddenly talk about the future. The person who struggled to express affection may become unusually open. The person who once seemed comfortable being apart may suddenly struggle with the possibility of losing you permanently. From the outside, this can look confusing, but it may simply be years of suppressed emotion finally reaching the surface. The roles can completely reverse. Now they're the ones waiting for a message. They're the ones wondering what your silence means. They're the ones questioning whether you found someone else. And for perhaps the first time, they understand what it feels like to care deeply while having no guarantee that the other person will still be there. That realization can force them to confront the very wounds that caused them to run in the first place. But understanding those wounds is only the beginning. If they truly want you back, the real challenge isn't simply returning. It's learning how to stay, communicate, take responsibility, and build the emotional safety they once believed they couldn't handle. Those early experiences can leave a lasting mark. They may have learned that love always came with conditions, that getting close meant eventually getting hurt, or that depending on someone would eventually lead to disappointment or abandonment. As adults, those old lessons can continue operating quietly beneath the surface. Eventually, they may begin connecting the dots. The behaviors that once protected them as children are now creating problems in relationships. The emotional walls that helped them survive earlier experiences may now be keeping them from receiving the closeness they genuinely want. Realizing that can be painful because they finally see what their fear has already cost them. But it can also be liberating because awareness creates the possibility of choosing differently. Sometimes this realization brings emotions they have suppressed for years to the surface. Tears appear unexpectedly. Feelings they never knew how to explain finally become words. Needs they were afraid to express finally get acknowledged. It can feel like releasing years of emotional pressure all at once. But that doesn't mean they suddenly know how to handle everything. They may move between intense openness and complete withdrawal because their old protective system is still active. One part of them wants to let someone in, while another part is still searching for an escape route. And this leads to one of the most important truths about an avoidant returning. Coming back is not the same thing as changing. They may genuinely regret leaving. They may genuinely love you. They may sincerely want another chance. But none of that automatically removes the deeper fear that closeness can trigger. Once the excitement of reunion settles and the relationship becomes emotionally intimate again, those old reactions can return. Suddenly, the same person who desperately wanted you back may once again feel the urge to create distance. That doesn't necessarily mean their feelings disappeared. It can mean sustained intimacy is activating the same fears that caused them to leave before. This creates an internal battle between growth and old conditioning. One part of them understands the value of connection and wants to build something healthier. Another part still carries the old instinct to protect itself by creating distance. They can love you and still feel overwhelmed by needing you. They can appreciate your presence while occasionally feeling trapped by emotional closeness. They can want intimacy and then become frightened when they actually receive it. That contradiction doesn't automatically mean they're being dishonest. It shows how difficult it can be to change attachment patterns that developed over many years. Returning is only the beginning. Real transformation requires them to examine their automatic reactions, tolerate emotional discomfort, and learn that closeness doesn't automatically equal danger. Good intentions aren't enough. Lasting change usually requires consistent self-awareness, honest communication, and for many people, professional support such as therapy. Without that deeper work, the relationship can easily fall into the same cycle again. They come closer, become overwhelmed, pull away, regret it, return, promise change, and eventually repeat the pattern. Breaking that cycle means learning to remain present during uncomfortable moments. When intimacy creates anxiety, they have to recognize that feeling as an old protective response, rather than immediately treating it as evidence that the relationship is wrong. They have to learn how to pause instead of disappearing, communicate instead of shutting down, and tolerate vulnerability instead of escaping it. That process is difficult because it asks them to experience emotions they spent years avoiding. But every time they choose to stay through discomfort, they create a different emotional experience. They begin teaching themselves that closeness can be safe, that expressing a need doesn't make them weak, that depending on someone doesn't mean losing themselves, that love doesn't automatically lead to pain, and there is something meaningful about the decision to return. It can represent a willingness to admit that comfort and independence weren't enough, that some connections matter deeply enough to challenge the defenses they've relied on for years. Still, returning is never a guarantee that everything will work out. There will be progress and setbacks. Some days they may communicate openly, while other days the instinct to withdraw may return. Healing rarely moves in a straight line. What matters is what they do when those old patterns appear. Do they disappear again, or do they explain what they're feeling? Do they shut down, or do they stay in the conversation? Do they run from discomfort, or do they learn to sit with it? Every time they choose connection instead of escape, they're building a new pattern. Every honest conversation becomes another reminder that intimacy doesn't have to end in disaster. In the end, healing isn't one dramatic decision. It's a series of small choices repeated over time. Choosing honesty instead of avoidance. Choosing communication instead of silence. Choosing connection while still maintaining healthy boundaries. And choosing love without allowing fear to control every step forward. An avoidant coming back doesn't automatically mean they've changed, but it can reveal something they spent years trying to deny. Real healing begins when they stop running from vulnerability and start choosing connection, even when fear tells them to escape. Coming back may be the first step, but staying open is where real transformation begins. Because love doesn't become stronger by avoiding fear. It becomes stronger when someone finally chooses to face that fear instead of letting it control them. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the Avoidant Effect, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one.